Welcome to our first official Sunderfolk tier list. My name is Shoal. I'll let the others introduce themselves.
Hey everybody, Rob here.
Hi guys, and Comet here.
So, as with any game, a meta develops around it. Sunderfolk is not a super competitive game, so I don't expect every player to care about how strong certain mechanics are. However, some people, like us, and I suspect others, enjoy learning about the meta of games they're playing to understand what's going on, to help them succeed mechanically in game. I think we all agree Sunderfolk is a criminally underrated game. It doesn't have a lot of community around it yet. Even our wiki is an ongoing incomplete project, and we're hoping that by creating some high-level content about Sunderfolk, we can inform current players, generate some discussion, and hopefully draw in some new folks to Arden. All of our rankings are based on 4-player runs on the Shadowstone difficulty. We will typically note when a mechanic is more or less useful based on number of players or difficulty level. And I think with that, we can just kind of get into the quick outline of the tiers. For this ranking list, we're going to have 5 tiers from S to D. S tier, these abilities are the ones that are game warping, they're uniquely powerful, or encounter altering in several situations. They'll be widely applicable. Entire team rounds will be shaped around the effects of an S tier ability. A tier, the gold standard, effective in many situations. You will consider using it most of the time. B is old reliable, not breaking any encounters, but decently effective and pragmatic, usually relevant. C is where you start to fall off a bit. It gets niche. You might have 1 or 2 situations where this is a good effect, but there are often better options. And then finally, D tier is lacking. It's rarely ever better than okay, almost always irrelevant or overshadowed, or else actively prohibits other better abilities. So today, we're going to start with the ultimate abilities of the 6 available characters at the moment. We know the Vanguard is coming out soon, but we'll exclude them for now. As of now, we intend to make respective tier lists for passive individual characters, skill cards, and finally the characters themselves, but today we are just doing the ultimates. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Rob to get us started.
Thank you very much, Shoal. So to start off the Ultimates ranking for the Sunder Fellows here, I'm going to have a hot take. I'm going to rank the Inferno of the Pyromancer in the C tier.
Whoa.
Alright, so that should be a very controversial take. We know we have a lot of Pyromancer fans out there. So let me give my explanation as to why. So first off, as we mentioned earlier in the video, we are ranking this based on 4-player Shadowstone. Being Shadowstone or not is not really relevant of how I rank Inferno, but the fact that it's for 4 players. So, a couple of things. Number 1, when you're playing with 4 players, the Inferno creates an area of fire, which could be harmful, right, to enemies, but could also be an obstruction to allies, especially if you have a couple of melee party members such as the Bearserker or the Rogue. Furthermore, you have other allies who like to create their objects on the ground, such as the Rogue who prefers to create gold on the ground, or the Bard who wants to create notes on the ground. So these can all come into conflict, or at the very least anti-synergistic, with the fire that the Inferno creates. Secondly, since this is an ultimate tier list, we all know that the ultimates cannot be used by everybody at the same time. It is an opportunity cost. Only one person can use it for a certain time. So there's a cooldown period as well. So we have to make sure that we're using the right ultimate for the right situation. The strength of the Inferno is it actually deals AoE damage. Right? So it's good if there's a lot of enemies on the board, which in 4 players, there's going to be a lot of enemies on the board. However, there are also other area of effect ultimates, such as the Starfall from the Arcanist, it's the same area of effect. Roar from the Bearserker has a bigger area of effect, as well as the Mosh Pit from the Bard, who also has a bigger area of effect. And unlike Inferno, which its utility or extra effect is just creating fire, the utility effects of the other ultimates are more useful, whether it's to stun, it's to weaken enemies and buff allies with a shield, or it's to move allies. In this sense, using Inferno is not usually the most appropriate thing to use or the more powerful ultimate to use at any given time, because in a 4-party setup, at least one of the Bard, the Berserker, or the Arcanist is going to be on the team. So even if you have a Ranger, Rogue, Pyromancer party, the fourth member is sure to have, a AoE that's going to be better than Inferno, at least in my opinion. Next, I do understand. I also took into consideration that for parties that like to work together and collaborate, Inferno can be boosted to higher levels of damage compared to the other area of effect ultimates. However, it didn't put a lot of weight into it because I thought that they would be sacrificing, let's say, their turns to create fire or their trinkets to create fire for the Pyromancer to eat before he launches an Inferno. Again, I think that's an opportunity cost that we're not factoring in when we're seeing how powerful a fully boosted Inferno from the Pyromancer is. On that note, I'm going to keep it at C. If you guys want to move it around, I think the next turn up is going to be going to Comet.
I actually won't be touching Inferno, but I just want to briefly comment. Because I think one of the big things that a lot of people are going to get kind of in a bunch about is, why is Inferno so low? He was so good in my run. I had so much fun dealing so much damage. But one of the things I've learned about Pyro, just watching games and playing games myself, is that I will actually take a stand against one thing you said, which is I think Pyromancer's Inferno is probably the single hardest ultimate that gets punished by the Shadowstone buff. The reason being that Inferno's damage output against elite creatures oftentimes just isn't enough to hit the threshold that it needs to consistently knock dudes out, which is the big benefit that Inferno typically has. If Inferno can stack Lava Rock boosts, it can stack Firepower boosts, typically it can wash an entire board clean. But if it can't do that anymore, which is its one calling card that comes at the cost of producing fire that has the consequences and benefits that you've already mentioned, then its main niche above the other ultimates becomes a lot more difficult to use in Shadowstone. So in a tier ranking for something like a normal playthrough, or even something like a challenge playthrough, I could see Inferno going much higher actually. But in terms of Shadowstone, I think it's oftentimes overblown because of the experiences people have in other difficulty. I'm gonna drop my mildly hot take into this, which I hope is not overly hot. I'm gonna put Mosh Pit in S. A lot of people, including me, when I first did my playthroughs of Sunderfolk, heavily undersold this ability. Like, I was like many of you. I never touched my Bard's ultimate. I played Bard the first time, and I let my Pyromancer use Fireball, and we saw its magic. However, over time, the advantages of Mosh Pit to me have awakened themselves, being incredibly strong and applicable in an innumerable amount of locations. Firstly, it is one of 2 ultimates and one of 2 moves in most of the entire game that hits a full 2 hex radius around the target character, which itself is pretty rare, especially with the Bard focusing mostly on support sans crowd surf. Additionally, Mosh Pit has the enchant ability that pulls other heroes into locations, which a lot of times the board on especially Shadowstone, one of the hardest situations you can end up in is having your party split, which, especially if you have stuff like Bearserker and you have stuff like Rogue, can lead to some very poor positioning issues just because of bad luck that happens in the game. Maybe a monster targets you that you don't expect, a spider summons an unfortunately placed web, one of the ooze monsters spawns slime that if you end up messing up one movement completely screws your strategy, and Mosh Pit is the single golden answer that solves all of your problems on the board, while also dealing AoE damage equal to most of the highest level damage in the game. That's not even factoring in stuff like Inspire being able to remove weakness buffs from your creatures when they attack, which allows them to then not have the weakness on their turn, or removing defense buffs from other monsters because of its AoE damage. It's not the flashiest ability, ironically, despite its name, but Mosh Pit just has a mutiny of different applicable locations that, especially with the Bard's kit, can continuously set itself up well for success. So, firstly, not to jump ahead, but Mosh Pit, in my opinion, is one of top top 2 or potentially top 1 in the game, and my S rank shows that.
I think that's very well stated. I completely agree with everything you said about Mosh Pit. I think it is unique. It is a unique card in the game, ability in the game, because no other hero can provide that mobility. The damage, of course, is phenomenal. The team, like the ability to spread damage, I will say it can be a little tricky to set up sometimes. I've had cases where like the bard didn't position properly for a 4-person party, and like as a result, everyone who got pulled over and like was doing the attacks, they weren't like lined up appropriately to hit the right monsters. But small complaint with the otherwise extremely powerful ability. So I completely agree with the S tier placement. Who do I want to touch? I'm gonna leave Starfall for Rob. I don't know if this is a hot take, but I'm also going to place Roar in S tier. I think Roar is the Barbarian's best card is Bearserker, excuse me. I know it's officially Bearserker, but everyone just calls him Bearserker. It's not even a contest. It's his best card by far. And not only does it have the same AoE effect damage-wise as the Bard, and if you're running the Barbarian, I keep calling him Barbarian, Bearserker, in my opinion, you're probably going to be taking Lava Rock, at least in my experience, because he needs the damage buff. I always spend it on his ults because the damage from it is very strong, the area of effect is very strong, but what really sells this ability in S tier for me is that while it doesn't have the crowd control effect of Starfall, it can completely invalidate enemy attacks with the weaken it inflicts and the shield it gives allies. I just think the area it is affecting and the amount of enemies that can, like, disrupt, I just think it is a phenomenal ability. I would feel criminal putting it... You could maybe make an argument it's only A, but anywhere below that would be criminal to me.
Before I continue, a couple of things I want to remind you guys on for the tier list. Number one, for everybody that's listening, we are assessing this as the upgraded version of the Ultimates. As you guys know, there is a version that you get as when you first get the Ultimate, and there's an upgraded version. I think you get at level 10. I'm not sure which levels exactly, but there's an upgraded version where you get either extra damage or extra moves, something like that. So I hope that's clear for everybody. And then second of all, if you're like splitting hairs, you could, say, okay, I think I like Roar more than Mosh Pit. I want to put it ahead of Mosh Pit. Do you want to do that, or you keep it behind Mosh Pit?
That is fair. For me personally, I would probably rank it ahead of Mosh Pit. I do think Mosh Pit is, as I mentioned, unique. There is no other way to get your entire team across the board in the concise manner that Mosh Pit does. It literally saves runs at times, so that is hugely impactful. But the number of times where that's been the case for me, like my team was so discombobulated or uncoordinated that they weren't all like moving toward the end appropriately, I found was less common than like, hey, we need to kill everything now, and also, like, just in case, I want everyone to be super safe. So I think I would probably put Roar ahead of it. It for me, is probably my number 2 ult in the game.
I would personally put Mosh Pit ahead, but I think what wasn't mentioned earlier was that Mosh Pit is better in the hands of a skilled person. Somebody who knows what they're doing. It's in the hands of somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, is a first-time user, they're more likely to make mistakes. So I think it's a more tactically required skill. For Roar, I agree with all the things that you mentioned. One thing I'd like to note here, and I agree it's an S tier, but I would just put it behind Mosh Pit, but I won't waste my turn to move it. I'll keep it there ahead of Mosh Pit. One thing I want to point out is if the Bearserker or anybody in the party is carrying the weapon that gives retaliate if somebody does 0 damage.
Yes.
I think it works really well with Roar. So I think that too in the party is a encouragement of using Roar more, because that leads to the constant procs of getting retaliate buffs. So I think that's another point in Roar's favor, especially with shield buff on you, and then there's weakness buffs on the enemy. since I won't move it, so I think we're all trying to be nice here. Nobody's moving anyone's picks. I'll be now ranking my own pick again. I'll be picking Starfall, as everybody's alluded to. I'll be ranking Starfall into the S tier.
To the
And I'm
surprise
going
of
to
nobody.
move.
Yeah, I'm gonna put it here. I assume that's where you want it.
Yep. So, reasoning for putting Starfall ahead of all of the other ultimates is that I think in Shadowstone, one of the key things that you want to do is to avoid damage, and the way to avoid damage in this game is to use conditions or status effects. This could be your blinds, situationally confuses. My favorite, stuns. Starfall allows you to stun an enemy. I think that not only does it provide damage, but it provides a way to mitigate damage. Roar would only possibly prevent damage from, let's say, minions or mobs, right? But for an elite, some damage is still going to go through. Mosh Pit doesn't provide any damage mitigation. For Shadowstone, I think it's very critical to deal damage and avoid damage, and that's why I would rank Starfall the highest. One last note here, what I'd like to point out is that it's clear to me for Starfall to be the top ultimate in the game, because even if it's only, let's say, a 3-player run or a 2-player run, stunning is always useful. In fact, on a 2-player run, it's more useful because there's less enemies on the board, and you can use your stunning against the bosses, which again is a big swing in terms of action economy and damage mitigation for your party or your duo. I think whether it's 2 players, 3 players, 4 players, Starfall is just always useful. There's not a situation where it's not useful. Whether there's also a mob of enemies or even single target, I would consider using it as a single target skill, just to get the stun off.
I want to make a brief chime in on Starfall, because I remember when you first talked to me about ultimates in this game, and you told me that Starfall was the best, I looked at you, and my eyes squinted. I was a little perplexed, because a lot of the times when I've seen Starfall be applicable, a lot of times it does look like a cheap man's Roar or a cheap man's Mosh Pit, and then it took me a little bit of time to realize that unconditional stun is very rare in this game. Yes. The only other example that immediately comes to mind for specifically unconditional stun is Skull Rattle Shot from the Ranger and the Hourglass from the favor token market, which costs
Venom Mind Hourglass.
Yes.
And I will note, actually, Skull Rattle Shot does have a condition. You have to have Strengthened.
Yes, but you can typically
there's
avert
one
that
more,
with Lock
actually.
Buff and or other strength buff mods with stuff like Bard, but
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. But in the terms of the freeness to be able to stun things when you need to, which particularly matters in Shadowstone, while still having AoE applicability, and to just briefly chime in as well, Confuse is no joke. Like, that is also a very strong ability. Most, like, especially stuff like involving wraiths or even things like the Ooze characters can be very easily manipulated because of Confuse, because I believe they attack and then teleport, which is very applicable. Like, it's just the Confuse and the Stun are both very useful abilities. It's something that in my future Shadowstone runs I definitely want to take advantage of more, especially because sometimes the Arcanist can feel like it's running a little low on mana. When you need that mana recharge, it's an ultimate that hugely can benefit you in the right situation.
It also recharges mana, by the way.
Exactly. That's what it gives you, like a portable battery for your mana, which is like the Arcanist's one sole problem amongst an amazing kit. So I'm fine to leave Starfall there, but I am gonna be a willing hater. I'm gonna move Mosh Pit above Roar.
I think I'm okay with that.
The reason being is, Joel, is not because I'm saying you have a skill diff. It's, for me, when I've seen Roar, I think, like how I mentioned Inferno can struggle in Shadowstone, because of its low damage. Oftentimes in Shadowstone, you would end up in situations where buff stacking from enemies when they get the strength and the haste buffs over time leads to the weaken of the Roar being useful. Do not get me wrong, it is still incredibly powerful and it's still an S tier ability bar none. And it struggles to stay continuously beneficial. Where I feel like Mosh's navigation and its ability to remove the buffs that can allow people to have a successfully striking turn leaves a permanent lasting impact. I feel like Mosh Pit is the stronger of the two abilities to change a match, whereas Roar feels like it's very good if it gets you from the threshold of I think we're going to win to we're definitely going to win. Mosh Pit can be the situation that says we are completely losing to now we have a chance.
I think that's very fair.
I will briefly chime in as well, just for those who are gonna pick, like, we're gonna grasp at straws here for which is better. And my two odds, Mosh Pit and Roar are the two closest abilities in the game.
That's
so it's like trying to find which apple weighs more in a market. Like, it's not that different.
I completely understand that. I think I am going to do the Ranger. I'm going to put the Ranger behind the Pyro at C. I don't think this is a completely useless ability. Which is not a great way to start any ability. But I will say, and this is the trick, because you kind of have to rank it. Are we choosing to rank it in relation only to other ultimates, or in relation to entire kits, all other mechanics? I'm going kind of the latter approach with a more broad view here. When I consider not Skull Rattle Shot. I think it's called Snipe, right?
Snipe, yeah.
Yeah, Snipe.
I originally put this at B, but the more I think about it, the more I'm like, okay, you can murder one thing, maybe. But are you really gonna do, like, an attack? I want to say it starts at, like, attack 12. With, like, strength in 1 and the first passive.
12 is the upgraded version.
Yeah, okay, so it might even not be that. On one guy, when you could, like, stun him and let someone else AoE him, or, like... I mean, and then I have to consider cards like Aetherize from the Arcanist, where it's like, it does more base damage by far.
Exactly.
And like, it's not a super high damage threshold to hit. Like, there are other abilities that might do a little less damage than Snipe, but have, like, way more utility. And also I have to weigh it against, like, every other ultimate in the game. I don't think it's a surprise that I place Snipe as the lowest of all the ultimate abilities. It's very in character with the Ranger in that it's, like, very simple to use, and it, like, feels powerful if you're, like, new to the game, I guess. But once you get Skull Rattle Shot, are you doing anything else with the Ranger? Like, there are maybe use cases where, like, volley comes up, or, like, you're still using, I call it, yeah. There is almost never a situation where I feel like this is the answer to the problem on the board. I have had it where, like, maybe it's the only way that, like, the Arcanist is tapped on mana, and we have one boss character left, and we just absolutely positively needed to die this turn. That's the time when Snipe has a moment, but it's not there otherwise. I find it very hard to justify using this over anything else when ultimates are available.
So actually, I agree with you, and that's why I'm going to move it down a tier, infuriate the Ranger fans out there, and move Snipe to the D tier. Because we have defined that the D tier is the tier that's for lacking. Most of the time, as you said, what's the situation we're in if there's just one target? Are you using something else than Skull Rattle Shot? So most likely the Ranger, rather than use his ultimate, would rather use Skull Rattle Shot and stun the sole enemy. The damage difference between the two is not too much. And I think, unless you are pressed for turns, which is possible in Shadowstone, which is the situation you mentioned earlier, that's the only time I'd actually still use Snipe over Skull Rattle Shot. But if time is not an issue, then I would actually just prefer to use Skull Rattle Shot and then let somebody else in the team use their ultimate. I think that, let's say, Roar or Mosh Pit could provide to be better for some other utility reasons. Even Inferno, compared to just damage from Snipe. Another reason why I wouldn't use this, I think as well, that it when you are in a group, you're trying to kind of like make everybody feel welcomed, or get their shining moment. Playing your ultimate card is one of those occurrences. And I'm the ranger. Okay, that's one of the ways I can help my other teammates shine better, by let them feel good by using their ultimate. Because I'll be honest, I don't necessarily feel good using Snipe anyway. And I'm thinking, if there was another ranger player, yes, maybe I'd let them use Snipe, but we might be, needing other ultimates to be used. So in either case, the Snipe has, for me, no use to just very niche use cases, to be used. And those are my 2 cents on Snipe.
It is hilarious to me that the Ranger has 2 abilities in both Snaring Vines and Skull Rattle Shot that even in boss fights you would still just never use Snipe. But with like AI manipping of vines, especially for stuff like, a lot of people would go, well, you could use Snipe for Ogre Queen, which is one of the harder early game fights, and sometimes that damage is necessary. But if you use Snaring Vines, she can just get stuck 3 times, and that's the equivalent of like 2 to 3
Exactly.
stuns if you're lucky. And then you're never touching Snipe ever, and then by the time you get to stuff like Prophet, you have every other tool, for the most part, that's better than Snipe and outclasses it. So, I completely agree here. I also just think that Snipe, in terms of the kit, is the least necessary for the Ranger, with stuff like Scout ahead and Hunter Shot being not obviously as strong, for certain, but even early game serving as high damage, single target emphasis, that Snipe just kind of isn't necessary for the Ranger's kit in the same way that the rest are for the others. I'm fine to leave Snipe where it is. I guess that leaves me with Rogue. I'm a little back and forth on this, so I'm okay to let this go into the hands of Shoal and you, Rob, after I rank this. And I'm gonna say that I'm gonna rank 1000 Cuts in B tier. And I'm gonna start by saying, first off, best ultimate for aura farming in the game. By far. Like, it's not even close. So, in terms
Pretty
of
much
swag,
everything Rogue,
like,
I feel like.
yes, it's very
Yeah.
fitting.
The
So if you,
teleporting stuff is cool.
yes, so if you like feeling cool while playing your games of Sunderfolk or D&D, the Rogue's got you covered. Now, unfortunately, this is not a swag tier list, and unfortunately, this is an applicability tier list. And actually, if this was a non-Shadowstone tier list, and this was for Challenge or Normal, I'd actually rank Rogue lower. But the reason for that, and the reason I'm actually ranking it in B tier here, is that unlike Inferno and Roar, I think Rogue is the single ultimate that gets better with Shadowstone. The reason for this is that the 1000 Cuts threshold of having something be below 8 or less health after the attack, or whatever it is before the final version, is far more common in the case of a Shadowstone run, just due to the HP, the HP that the monster's having being significantly higher. So very oftentimes, there are situations with a Rogue in a Shadowstone run where you can just get monsters to that threshold, and if you can just inch them over the edge, then the Rogue can get 3 to 4 kills because you can chain teleports together with 1000 Cuts to get 3 or 4 dangerous monsters with massive buff stacking off the board. Which, to be fair, is nowhere near as good as the AoE abilities. You can see the gap between them. There's literally an entire tier separating the two. But in terms of really needing a specific niche card or set of enemies removed, 1000 Cuts can save you in a way that most other abilities can't. I would say it's probably not the single best move in the Rogue's kit. Honestly, if I had to say the best thing in the Rogue's kit, it is just the passive, period. But in terms of what this card can do, it starts off strong as a good ultimate, as the 8 HP threshold, as I just checked, is actually available right at level 5. And it's something that just continues to have use no matter where you are or what you're dealing with. it's not going to be usable all the time, as it can be inconsistent if you try to use it just to do damage, because it will deal 5 damage and you will feel incredibly sad. But I think it's a strong ability that serves a purpose. You will have missions where you never touch it, and you will have missions where it potentially can save you out of a bad situation, which to me is a B tier ability.
I think that's fair. Do I want to move it at all? Or do I want to move Starfall? I don't think we've touched Starfall. Or Inferno. I feel like there's an argument for Inferno to be moved up to the B tier, but I don't think... I would still leave it behind Thousand Cuts. I also wonder if there's a case for Thousand Cuts going down to the C tier, and the gap is just that extreme. Because
we do have the C tier as Snitch.
Yeah, it is. That is true, and I do have to consider it against Starfall, Mosh Pit, Roar, and the cases where I'm going to use Thousand Cuts instead of one of those is absolutely situational. Niche, however you like to say that word. But at the same time, I do think it can do things that other ultimates simply cannot. Like, it does have that execute, which is really nice sometimes. Like, that genuinely might be the only way you are killing a few enemies in one turn. I think I'm okay with where it is, and I think on that, I'm actually fine with this tier list as it is currently. So I will pass my turn without moving anything. Rob, you have the final say.
Well, I actually agree with you. I agree with how the tier list looks. This is how I would have ranked it as well. One thing I'll just chime in on Thousand Cuts. So another thing that I like about it is the capability to teleport. I think this is useful for getting to hard to reach targets that perhaps the AoEs might have a hard time reaching. Because like if you think of Roar or Mosh Pit, it's like about two squares or hexes away. But for Thousand Cuts, you can teleport, I think, 3 squares? There's just like a wall or obstacle or whatever that's preventing you to reach or damage a certain target. Thousand Cuts actually gets you there. So it helps you to kill high priority targets. So these are your elites or any annoying enemies. Let's say perhaps those exploding mushrooms. So if you want to set off a chain mushroom reaction, this could be useful for that. That Roar or Mosh Pit might not reach, depending on how the enemies and obstacles are positioned. I like this, so I'll turn it over now to you guys if you have any other comments you'd like to share or you want to review our rankings. But I think this is a good first tier for the Sunderfellows.
I don't think I have any real additional comments that we haven't already talked about. Comment?
I'm thankful that, I will say just briefly, I'm thankful that we're going to get engagement because the Pyromancer suckers are going to be posting in the comments. So,
I feel kind of bad for the I love the Pyro. I love him. He's so... the flavor on him is oozing. It just drips. But, yeah. I'm sorry, Pyros. I feel your pain.
I will say, of the ultimates in the game, aside from Pyro, Thousand Cuts is probably the most divisive. When we get to the character tier list, and I'm not going to go too far into it now because we're going to keep this succinct, Thousand Cuts gets so much better if you just have Shroud. It's such a better ability and has so many more applications in terms of that damage threshold that I was mentioning. The second that Shroud stays in the picture, that does mean that it gets significantly better if you have something like a Barbarian with Provoke, or if you have other stun effects with Hourglass, or obviously not Starfall because you can't use both in succession. Or even stuff like Pyromancer's Technics with Blind. Like, it's far more useful if you can keep the Shroud there. By itself, without the Shroud, it becomes much harder and I think much closer to C tier. But if you're able to position the Rogue effectively enough with movement trinkets, with positional, like, decoys, and with backup, like, guys like the Whistle enemies, I think that the Rogue becomes much better with his ultimate.
Very fair. Although I do have to wonder, and we haven't gotten into it intentionally, so we aren't talking about like skill cards, like the basic skill cards. I mean, Rogue has a lot of good ones. He's got Smoke and Mirrors. I mean, even some of his starting ones, like Myriad Blades, are, like, I think pretty strong.
Sneak attack, actually, is another stud.
You're right, yeah, he just has another stun in his kit. So it's, again, kind of the case where, like, maybe a better version of the Ranger in some ways. Like, am I going to use the ult, or am I going to let someone else use the ult and I'm just going to use one of my really strong regular abilities? So I think I'm fine leaving it in B tier, but...
Yeah. I just want to play a little bit of devil's advocate. I do think that with the amount of stun abilities like Skull Rattle, like Sneak, even Pyrotechnics, and just a lot of the damage in this game, I think that the Rogue is very good at getting to its own thresholds because of Sneak Attack. I actually think the two work well in tandem rather than one solely being apart. Does that mean I think 1,000 Cuts is better than Roar, Mosh Pit, or Starfall? Absolutely not. Like, it is definitely an entire tier step down. Entire tier step down, for that matter. But I feel like in a Shadowstone playthrough, whereas Inferno, I feel like if I used it, I could be actively making a mistake if I get unlucky, and Snipe, I feel like I'm actively throwing if I use it. 1,000 Cuts feels like an ability that I could genuinely use in the heat of a moment, and it could be useful in a way that the other ultimates can't be, but in far more niche scenarios, because you do have to hit those thresholds very specifically, which requires either very good party teamwork or a lot of good setup in advance with some luck. It's not the master ability that you'll see when we do the other move tier list that the Rogue has access to, but it serves its purpose fine enough.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. It's unique. Like the Bard's Mosh Pit, I think it is a unique ability. It's just, as you said, more niche in its application.
Whereas, I think genuinely the top 3 abilities change the entire kits of the characters they're in.
Oh, yeah.
Other than maybe Arcanist, just because Arcanist's other abilities, spoiler warning, are so freaking ridiculous that they're like, it can't change his kit anymore, but it's still amazing. The, like, top 3 are, like, defining changes for the character fundamentally.
Absolutely.
Agreed. A couple of notes I just remembered for 1,000 Cuts before we close. So I just double checked. I thought it was like a teleport 3. It's actually a teleport 5.
Yes.
Regarding my point earlier that this allows you to hit certain high priority targets which you may not be able to reach with your other AoEs. That's the niche used for 1,000 Cuts. It has a very far range. It's a teleport 5. Second, you could say that all of the ultimates are boostable, and then we brought up earlier for the Pyro that this is the most boostable with party teamwork because everybody can create fire using trinkets to boost the Pyro. 1,000 Cuts, I think, benefits the most from getting boosted. As mentioned by Comet, that if you reach certain damage thresholds, it swings the action economy to your party because it removes a high priority enemy off the board. So if there's like people who are thinking, oh, do I boost the Pyro and give him the strength buff from Lava Rock Chunk, or do I give it to the Rogue? The Rogue should get it, because if they can get to the threshold for the execute, that removes the enemy completely off the board and swings, the amount of action economy, damage mitigation to the party. So those are my final thoughts on 1,000 Cuts.
I know I've brought up much discussion of 1,000 Cuts, and I will chime in one last thing. Since it's kind of something we're going to need to mention a lot in the future, is one of the most important parts of a Shadowstone run in general is the mindfulness of previously used Fate cards. And with the repetitious use of 1,000 Cuts, it allows you to cycle through your Fate card deck much faster than any other ultimate here. So if there's a Fate card that you really benefit from, like a +4 to damage or a +3 to damage, and you really want to cycle it to get it back quickly, 1,000 Cuts can get you 3 or 4 cards deeper in your Fate card deck for the shuffle to happen, which the other ultimates can't do. Now, the mindfulness of how much that will matter is, like, not much in most situations, but if you really need that damage boost later in the game and you need the, like, 1 in 9 or 1 in 8 chance to try and hit it to just save you out of a bad situation, then yeah, 1,000 cuts can do that. Obviously, that's not the main reason you'd be using it, but just a thing to touch upon, because it will matter for future tier lists.
Yeah, and we can get into that maybe, especially when we're discussing like the basic skill cards for characters.
Yes, most certainly.
Kind of like our own personal ranking criteria of like what we value in the game. But I tend to find multi-attacks are better than single attacks, even if they're AoE, just because you do cycle your deck more. You have better opportunity to draw better cards, and they can be more targeted in their damage output.
I think we can close it there.
Yeah, I guess I'd just say thank you everyone for tuning in, and yeah, hopefully I would love to hear your thoughts on these. You know, obviously we have our opinions, but we want to hear yours, so get in those comments, and we'll see you guys out in the Sunderlands. Thanks for joining us.